Good morning. I wanted to continue with the exploration of modeling matter. And in the last week, I had related the unified field equation that had been derived some time ago to the emergence of matter. And I want to give some concrete examples and show how this complexification of matter takes place. So recalling that this is the unified field equation, and it's actually reflects a quadrality, not just a duality between wave and particle, but there's wave, particle, field, and block, and this represents the block, if you will. And there's four kinds of dimensions to it that emanate from the four qualities inherent or codified in light. So there's a light matrix that sets the deep template of how matter emerges. There's a space matrix that indicates the emergence of matter from the untransformed layer. And there's a time matrix that indicates when each of these aspects of the layers of light are active. But let's look at this more concretely. So I'm going to take a few examples. And first, let me take the example of the electromagnetic field, and I'll depict that by electromagnetic, here EM, and recall that these four independent dimensions are at the more untransformed level are referred to as the physical, vital, mental, and integral, and in their deeper essence they're referred to as presence, power, knowledge, harmony. So when we think about the electromagnetic field, the question is, how does that field take the codification in light and reflect it in its operation? So if we think about the physical or the presence aspect, then this is through the ability of the electromagnetic field to create particles of mass. I'll represent that by mass, by M for mass. The power aspect is reflected through the energy gradient that is implicit in the electromagnetic field, and I'll represent that by frequency, because the energy gradient is a function of the different frequencies that exist in the electromagnetic field or spectrum. And the knowledge aspect is represented by wavelength, because we have different archetypes for spectrums or waves that operate within this field, from the, for example, infrared, X-rays, ultraviolet, and so on. And the harmony aspect, as discussed earlier, is embodied in the speed with which the electromagnetic field or spectrum moves, which is the speed of light at the untransformed layer. So we can see that that codification in light, how it operates or creates the operation for a field such as the electromagnetic field. Now let's look at another level of complexity and think about quantum particles. So we're looking at different orders of magnitude. So electromagnetic field may exist at levels smaller than 10 to the minus 34 meters. But when we think about the quantum particles, they begin to emerge arguably at 10 to the minus 34 meters. And the question is, how does that codification in light, this fourfold codification, show up at the quantum level? And here, if we think about the presence aspect, that is through the Higgs boson that gives mass to any particle that has mass. And when we think about the power aspect, this is reflected by leptons. When we think about the knowledge aspect, it's through quarks. and harmony is through bosons. And so we see that this underlying fourfoldness is, or codification, organizes the play of quantum particles. Similarly, if we go up a few levels to the atomic level, then, or this is the periodic tables of the different elements that exist. And here we have the presence aspect being depicted in elements that have D shell orientation, and the power aspect by the S shell elements, the knowledge aspect by the P shell, and the harmony aspect by the F shell. And we've discussed this earlier, but just in terms of how this fourfoldness plays out. And then when we think about the cellular level, which is 10 to the minus 6 meters, then we have the presence aspect being reflected in proteins, the power aspect by polysaccharides, the knowledge aspect by nucleic acids, and the harmony aspect by lipids. So we see that from 10 to the minus 34 to 10 to the minus 6, which is 30 orders of magnitude, how this essential scheme plays out in the organization of matter as it arises, and the organization itself is based on certain core principles, these 4 core principles around which the variety of matter emerges. But when we look deeper and then ask how does this, the different aspects of this equation play out, so let's consider the play of the 2 levels that we're referring to as M2 and M1. And as a recollection, so here I'm going to depict complexity along this axis here, starting from say 0 to greater complexity, and here along this axis I'm going to depict the play of these fundamental sets that emerge from these deep essences of presence, power, knowledge, harmony. So the idea is that as different layers of matter emerge, the size of these sets, meaning that the different elements that are associated with the set of presence, set of power, set of knowledge, and set of harmony, grow larger and larger. And so we'll depict that action by M2, and if we plot that, then we can say that the size of these sets generally perhaps follows some kind of curve like this. So as we move from the electromagnetic field through quantum particles, through the periodic table, through cells, then the essential qualities that are associated with these 4 deep essences multiply. So for example, as we've seen at the cellular level, knowledge takes on different meanings. So for example, a nucleic acid can function as a repository of knowledge or library. It can pass on knowledge to next generation of cells through DNA and RNA. It kind of creates the laws for how the functioning of the cell takes place. It encodes within itself how all the proteins shall act, and so on. So there's kind of a complexification on the dimension of knowledge, and similarly there are complexifications along each of the different dimensions as we move across this. So we see that the essential size of these 4 sets increases as matter complexifies or evolves and continues its evolution. Now if we think about M1, which is the signature aspect, and recall that the signature aspect is trying to capture the uniqueness of any organization, and the uniqueness itself is a function of the combination of elements in these sets. So if there are say 10 elements in each of these sets, then right away we see that at this level the number of signatures is a function of that 10 by 10 by 10 by 10, so it becomes much larger. So we would expect that this M1, the complexity of M1 is perhaps approaching this limit here, and it's growing much faster as M2 grows, this grows much faster. And so this captures kind of how we would see the emergence of M1 and M2 over time. And what this is essentially telling us in kind of summary is that there may be levels here that we've not captured, and there may be further emergence that takes place that we still haven't experienced. But certainly, however it does occur, it's occurring along these 4 dimensions, and the complexity that we see at each level may seem random, but actually is not random. It's a function of M2 and M1, and that's why we see so much more diversity at the more and more visible levels in us and around us.